Hello and Happy New Year. Welcome to our latest and our first web seminar of the year. My name is John Kowalski. I'm part of the marketing team here at Pickguard. And today's topic, start the year off right with a color program review. Always good to take a look at that right when you're getting going. Anyway, our speaker today, Mr. Greg Schreider, he's part of the key accounts team as well as business line manager for paint and coatings makers. So with that, I will turn it over to him momentarily. If you do have questions, please log them in the chat box located in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And time permitting, we'll get to them. If we do run out of time, we'll follow up individually with you to make sure you get those answered. We are also recording this presentation, so immediately following, you will receive an automated marketing email with a link that you can view this later, share it with colleagues, whatever you wish. So with that, let me turn things over to Greg. Greg, how are you, sir?
Good, John. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
You bet. Audio's great. Thank you.
All right. Well, like everything in the new year, a lot of us make resolutions, and we certainly come up with new KPIs to follow at work. And it's a good time to sit back and look at the color program if you have an active one, or maybe start a new one or modify one and see what can be improved. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. And it starts with looking at your internal network. So this is to identify and make sure you are in touch with all the right stakeholders on your internal network, whether it be design and R&D through production or QA. And then you can also look at your external network. This would be suppliers and vendors, any kind of distributors or anything in your distribution segment, as well as customers and strategic partners. And again, it's just to identify and make sure that you're in touch with all of their needs. First thing is what's working and what could be improved. We always like to look at the people side of things. So how are the people doing? How is their training? Do we add people? Do we lose people? Are there any areas that we think training could be improved, or an area of training or a new type of measurement technique, say jetness or something like that? And then how do we rate the color knowledge of the team, and where do we want to go for the new year? Next is how is the IT infrastructure? Always a fun topic, but something that's certainly necessary, especially if you're using SQL servers and communicating across networks or across different facilities. Next is how is my color network, the health of my color network? Have my raw material suppliers changed? If we're coordinating with multiple suppliers, have there been any changes? Certainly every new year, there's a lot of change and opportunity for change. So this is a time to take a look at that. And again, make sure that you're identifying all those needs of anything that's changed or anything that's new. Next is always a difficult question. Did we have any significant color issues in the past year? This is really a time to look inward and be honest. And if so, what or why did we have those issues, and what changes have we implemented or do we need to implement? So this is an area that I think is something that is an opportunity for self-improvement within the color program. Certainly within your internal network, there's always things that could be improved. And then are there any new goals for the color program this year? Are there new customers that we're going to go after? Are there new measurement techniques that are going to be required? Are there new different instruments that might be necessary? Just kind of a big picture, 50,000-foot view of what might be needed in the coming year. So when we talk about manufacturing, certainly we always have Pickguard have a lot of automotive examples, and this is one that would follow that line of thinking, where we want to have color harmony and visual acceptance. We have instrumentation, we have standards and organized workflow. We have software, and we have data share, data analysis, and then closing the circle back up to instrumentation to go full circle in that type of environment. And then if we're making something, say we're making paint or making plastic or inks, we really look for color consistency and visual acceptance. And again, the same type of workflow, just looking at it from a maker standpoint and not a manufacturing standpoint. For those elements of the corporate program, we have instrumentation. Maybe it's multi-angle, maybe it's solid color, but inter-instrument agreement and repeatability, reproducibility are always top of mind, and you want to have the best you possibly can have in that situation. But when we start to look at the instrumentation, what's the age of the instrument and what kind of condition are they in? Should we consider updating or upgrading those instruments in the coming year? Is the instrument firmware up to date? This is an easy one, okay? So this is something that everybody can usually do. Usually it's no charge, but it's important that everybody be on the same firmware if you're talking with multiple instruments. When was the last time you had your instrumentation serviced? Along with when was it last certified? Is that something that you need to plan for in the coming year? If so, what month and what communications do you have to have with the manufacturer to get that organized and scheduled? As mentioned earlier, are we going after new customers? Are there anything new procedures that we need to follow? Are there monthly verification programs that we want to implement where we're testing on a common set of standards and comparing amongst instruments, for example? Do we need to add more capabilities to the program? Do we need different geometries? So it's possible that you might be using a sphere or 45-0 and maybe you want to add multi-angle technology. But the next couple of slides just talk through what's the best geometry for the application that I'm working with. First question is, we have these two samples. This is actually a plastic sample. One is a structured surface and one is a glossy surface. And the questions we always ask are these the same color? And many people would say, they look different. So do these two samples match? And most of the time people would say not. So why is that? And do I want my instrumentation to say that they match, or do I want them to see how, or report an answer of how I see it? So that takes us into the first geometry to look at, and that's a 45-0 geometry. And these instruments usually have circumferential illumination. In other words, they're illuminating from around the circumference of the light source, and then illuminating down at 45 degrees, and then picking up at the detector or zero angle. And these instruments are usually used when you're comparing to a defined standard. So what does that mean? That means that you have a standard that's been approved for color, gloss, and texture. And so I want to compare like things to like things. Automotive interior, for example, if I'm comparing a leather grain to a stipple effect, 45-0 is going to see those how you see it. And so how do they, if it matches visually, it's going to say it matches visually. They're also very good for batch-to-batch control in manufacturing process of paints and plastics. And that's good because it picks up on gloss differences at the same time as color differences. And it's also good for manufacturing purposes when I want to harmonize various materials and surfaces. If I were to measure those two samples, I would get distinctly different curves, reflectance curves, and they would be very similar in shape, but the structured surface is always lighter or higher in reflectance compared to the glossy surface that appears darker. And you can also see that in your LAB values, where most of your color difference is in the delta L value. Specular component included sphere applications. This is where the sphere-based instruments would see those two samples as matching exactly. So they're very close to one another. And that is because they ignore the surface structure of the sample. So it doesn't see the difference between a matte and a glossy sample, or even a glossy sample and a structured surface. So typical applications where these are used and preferred are color matching applications, where they want to just get the color right, and then they're going to put that color into either a molded part or a painted surface, or even ink applications. The other area where these are common is for color strength development. So in color strength testing, we don't want to have gloss influence any of the color strength numbers that we get, and we're looking to use that test to maintain formulas across many, many different submissions of new colorants or new pigments. These instruments are also widely used in weathering studies. So when you ever put anything into a weathering situation, whether it's simulated or actual outdoor weathering, the first thing that starts to happen is the gloss starts to change. So we're not looking to see how the gloss changes in weathering studies. We're looking to see how that color is breaking down. So again, spheres instruments ignore surface texture. And therefore, when we look at the sphere curves, they'll be very, very similar to one another and almost laying on top of each other with very little color difference, and as shown here at a 0.1 delta E. So essentially exact. And again, summary, just to summarize, the structured and glossy surfaces, either I want a delta E to be apparent in 45.0, or I don't want the delta E to be apparent, and that's when I would use a sphere specular component included instrument. Maybe you're getting into more effect colors, and if so, then you want to look at multi-angle color matching. And with the BIC technology, you also get flake characterization. So spend a few minutes on that. And just to review, this is the optical bench of our BIC, which has 6 angles of color measurement. So you have 45-degree illumination, and then you have minus 15, 15, 25, 45, 75, and 110 for color. And now that's integral color, so it's going to include any sparkle effects into your reflectance curves. And then we separate out and do 15, 45, 75 degree sparkle values. And then we also have diffuse illumination, which is going to characterize the graininess of the surface. And that's important because when we're looking at especially automotive colors, but anything that has effect pigment, we want to see what it looks like on a sunny day as well as on a cloudy day, or in direct illumination and indirect or diffuse illumination. So just to review, the direct illumination is going to give us that sparkle. It's going to activate that metallic flake or that effect pigment. And then diffuse illumination is going to give us that graininess pattern or simulated cloudy sky type of situation. Just to review that the sparkle characterization is viewed in direct illumination, so the angle of observation is critical. And again, we measure 15, 45, and 75 in the instrument, and that information is going to give you information around reflectivity of the effect pigment that allows you to determine size of flake, amount of effect material that's in there, and even the type of flake that might be in there. Graininess is, again, diffuse illumination, and that's going to give us this texture or coarseness. And since it's diffuse illumination, the observation angle does not matter, and it won't really affect how you see graininess, but the distance is very important. So we can't resolve graininess from, say, 15 feet away. You really are looking at graininess, at arm's length, and it's very critical in formulation of paints and coatings to utilize this graininess, these graininess numbers, and it can lead to flake type and flake size. Disorientation and agglomeration of pigments and particles is certainly going to affect your graininess values. One of the things that's helpful with the sparkle evaluation is to look at the area and intensity. So there's 2 different attributes when we talk about sparkle. Area is how frequent does that sparkle occur? And then sparkle intensity is when it does occur, exactly how bright is it? And this helps to identify the different types of pigments or to help in color matching situations when evaluating, say, a new color, or certainly in a manufacturing environment, making sure that the fascia and the body color is very, very close to one another. And the graininess effect is really just a 0 to 15 value. So from fine to very grainy, a solid color would be 0. So if you're measuring a solid white and all of a sudden you get graininess values of 1, 2, 3, then you either have a serious dirt problem or there's something else going on with that color. And just a summary of why is sparkle and graininess so important. We can see a 0.5 change in sparkle and graininess. And so if we were looking at these color values, which again are integral color values, so they're integrating not only the absorption pigments, but any of the effect pigment is contributing to the reflectance curve and therefore calculated out into LAB values. These are pretty good color values and would pass most specifications. But when we look at the sparkle and graininess values at 15, 45, and 75 at 6 units of difference, that's 12 times what we can perceive. And these two gray samples look like night and day. One's very fine and there's a dark gray. The other dark gray is very coarse, and they look very, very different. And this would not pass on the 1545, maybe on the 75 degree. Sparkle is used a lot to evaluate application technique. And then certainly 3.5 units on the graininess value is again night and day differences. So that's maybe a little bit about instrumentation. Maybe it's something that you want to add to your existing color program. Maybe you're doing mainly solid colors and have been using 45-0 or sphere, and maybe exploring multi-angle to go after some new business might be a target for 2023. When we talk about the next element of a corporate program, we talk about standards and organized workflow. A big thing here is digital standards and standard management. How do I manage my standards over a period of time, or how do I verify existing standards in the field might be a concern. And then how do I sample my data, especially in a manufacturing environment? How do I have a routine or a workflow that I can follow day in and day out and through different shifts? So when we review this, take a look at reviewing the corporate program. When we use digital standards, are we using digital standards, I should say? And what are the standardized measurements and sample preparation? So digital standards are only possible when you have really, really outstanding inter-instrument agreement. And what that means is that all of the instruments that are in your color network more or less measure the same, and they could share the exact same digital standard. The advantages to digital standards, if you're not using them, is that they can be emailed and shared. So if you're adding a lot of new colors to your palette during the year, this is an easy way to then update your database and then communicate with your customers new standards that can be targeted or matched. You can also lock your tolerances with the luminant and observer preferences. So that means that you can set your delta E calculation that maybe your customer prefers, and you can lock that so it can't be changed. You can also manage your standards and have the same color be used for multiple customers. So you could have, say, an appliance white, and then you rename it for 3 or 4 different customers, but it's always the exact same target. So that way you're being customer friendly and using the naming convention that they want, but you have a single color target to go for. And that's good from the standpoint of keeping your SKUs down from a paint or plastic manufacturing standpoint, and targeting and keeping the management of all those standards to a minimum. This is one of my favorite topics, and that is my sample presentation consistent enough? And that is all about, can I repeat that preparation over and over and over again and get very, very similar numbers. So maybe if I'm drawing down paint, going away from hand drawdown to a machine drawdown might improve my accuracy. And that's important because then I can produce that paint in multiple locations if necessary. Another question is, especially in the last couple of years with supply chain stresses and all over the world, have my pigments or colorants changed? A lot of times we want to think that it was a drop-in replacement. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But in some cases, I might have to reformulate and then redistribute the digital standards or physical standards to a customer or within a supply chain. So things to look at, and certainly not only doing color and strength testing, but actually looking at the curves and the reflectance curves themselves to see if anything's changed. This is just an example of looking at a standard setup for a given standard within Smart Chart, where you can again set all your tolerances by angle. In this case, it's a multi-angle instrument. You have a luminant observer choices you can make. You can have up to 3. You have a primary, secondary, and tertiary illuminant choice. You can define if you want to look at the delta flop. All things can be defined and locked in place for any group of standards. Next is software. So mentioned earlier, are you using a SQL server, or the software comes with a compact server license? But if you're using SQL server, what's the health of my network, and are all the locations and all the different users using the same version of software? So that's, just to review and go back and look at your software. In this case, it's Smart Chart. You always have a version up in the left-hand corner. And you want to make sure that everybody's updated on the latest and greatest, because there may be specific OEM scales that have changed or been updated throughout the year. We do work with OEMs and other manufacturers to allow them to set their own equations, and that correlates to what's important to them when they look at color match. Some people might have more emphasis on sparkle. Some might have more emphasis on near specular angles. Some might not care about flop angles. Whatever it is, we can customize that, and you get free updates through the BitGardener website. So again, are all nodes of the color program on the same version of software? We're constantly making changes to the software, so take advantage of that and make sure you have all the latest and greatest functionality. Like I said before, we update those OEM scales on occasion, and so that's something that you want to take advantage of. And then if in the reporting function, if you've customized any standard reports for output that you can either print or send by PDF, make sure that all the nodes in your color network have the latest and greatest templates that you've designed. So if you added a new customer and they have a specific way they want to see the data, make sure everybody in the network has got that latest and greatest update. And then look at training needs. Reach out to us if you think that you need some help on new features or functionality, or maybe you just have some new people that you want to have go through a training session. Data share. So this is something that has been talked about pretty widely throughout the automotive industry, and we start to see this being used in other manufacturing applications such as appliance or consumer electronics, coil coating type of areas where they can use the data as more of a predictive tool. So this is again, obviously a GM slide where they presented at one of our user meetings, where they have the Basically, the plant is communicating to the fascia supplier as well as to the plant paint shop. They're making changes based on what they're seeing on the floor, and then that gets combined into a single database, and then the color report can come out, and then you can see, you can track differences, in this case, fascia and body data. And, if in this case, we see the body data over here and the fascia data here, we want to try to move the body on this 15 angle more towards where the fascia is to get a better color match, for example. And then just so you're familiar with it, this is the 15, 25, 45, 75, and 110 angles, all being displayed at the same time. So data share is really about making faster decisions to improve color match. And really it's about transparency. And so through transparency and sharing of data, is it easier to have collaboration, and does that lead to improvements that will impact profitability? I think everybody would agree that if you can make some changes to improve color match and you can show how that's giving you better harmony, then that's definitely going to lead to less rework and higher profitability. And one of the keys here is to be repeatable and reproducible. And if you can do that, then you have the security of being able to produce the same product in multiple plants. So from a paint manufacturing standpoint, for example, this is really important, so that if I can create one OEM formula, I can produce that in 3 or 4 different plants around the world to service that OEM and have on-color capability. Data analysis is the last element of the program before we can go full circle and come back into instrumentation. And this is really, green light reporting, making things easy to report, and trend analysis is really important for looking at differences within a plant or within the manufacturing process itself. So this is where you can incorporate test reports and schematics so you can see where the measurements are being taken, and the reporting can be highlighted as, red light, yellow light, green light, and then also it correlates to the attribute, in this case, the total delta E, that is in spec or out of spec. Another way to look at scatter reports. This is beneficial, especially when looking at large amounts of data. You can look at it and you can see, are we in spec most of the time, or are we all over the place? Just to get a quick understanding of what's going on within your network. And then lastly is color harmony, and showing where you have panel matches. So this is something that you can program in the software and track, and it will compare these two to each other, as well as to a standard. So again, color harmony is all about having the vehicle look harmonious for color and effect. And if it looks harmonious, then it's a shippable product. So what can we do to improve correlation to visual color harmony? So we started off with saying that we wanted either to have a manufacturing environment that has harmony and color consistency, or we're a paint manufacturer, we want color consistency and we want to match visually. This is really making sure that however we're looking at color, we're doing it consistently and it's repeatable, and it can do it in multiple sites. So are we sharing and duplicating the ways that we evaluate color? Did we gain a new customer? Are we going after a new customer where we might have to do something different or evaluate the way they're looking at a particular color? Are we certifying light boosts, and to what specifications? That's a popular thing, and we're seeing more and more that there can be differences in light booths, especially as they age. So should we consider a light room? That's where you can have an entire room with controlled lighting, so you could evaluate an entire vehicle, for example, or you could look at an entire refrigerator, or you could look at an entire office suite. And then lastly, if I'm using a light booth, what's the condition of that light booth, and should we update it? So the next few slides are just an example of if you were to evaluate a vehicle outside on the same day in 3 different cities, you're going to be looking at 3 different angles. So in Munich, this is on June 21, 2021. In Munich, you're at the 61 degree. And then if I'm in Detroit, I'm at 70 degrees viewing. And if I'm in Shanghai, I'm at 82 degrees viewing. So very different angles, even though I could be standing in the exact same place evaluating that vehicle. And where is the sun, in this case, relative to the vehicle? Is it behind me, where I'm evaluating, between 75 and 110? Or is it in front of me, where I'm looking at near specular angles of 15, maybe even minus 15? So it's really important to understand how the customers are doing the visual evaluation, and then how can I duplicate that when I'm not standing right with them. So this is just a summation of what we were talking about, that the sun position and geographic location will influence what angles you're looking at as the time of day, the size of the person and how far they are from the vehicle or whatever it is that you're looking at, and then the influence of vertical versus horizontal or add-on parts. Are they in a mounted position, or are they laying flat in a luminaire room where I'm doing visual evaluation offline? So one of the things that could be implemented is a whole light room. And this is an example where there's a whole lighting studio. And what you do is you have car and car position, you have 45-degree illumination, and then the observer moves from 15, 25, 45, 75, and 110. That's one way to kind of go at it. And this is another way to look at this. This is a light room where you bring the entire vehicle into this room, and you have lighting up here as well as on the ceiling. And you can have a light room or a light studio of that type of lighting environment. The other thing is you could have luminaires in the ceiling, and what we call daisy chained or linked together, where you can control all of them with a single remote. This is popular, and depending upon what it is that you're viewing, you might need 6 luminaires, you might need 9, you might need 3. That can be configured to whatever it is that the area that you need to illuminate to view. Here's another look at it if you daisy chain them this way. And then overall, do I just want to get a new light booth? Maybe I've got an old light booth that uses only fluorescent tubes, and I want to upgrade to a new light booth that can be certified on a regular basis. And if so, if I'm going to be certifying, which international standards do I want to agree with? Again, this is configurable with our light booth, and you can match any one of the standards that you need to follow. What's key is the addition of LEDs in addition to the filtered tungsten halogen lamps. And those additional LED banks of LEDs allows the spectrum to get a little bit closer to the CIE D65 curve, and it takes you from a B rating to an A rating for a light booth. And so that means that the agreement to D65 is going to be 0.25 or less, and B rating is between 0.25 and 0.5. So that's important because you can see that kind of a difference. It's very hard to see differences below 0.2. Trained colorists, the target is that they can see approximately 0.3. Certainly that varies from person to person, and experience plays into account also. If I'm measuring in multi-angle color with flake characterization and I'm using a luminaire, there are a few things to be aware of. These overhead luminaire systems are very popular, especially in automotive and in any application where you have a sizable sample that you're looking at. And a lot of times people will use these mounted to the SIE specification, and on the slanted table, they'll put their products out so that they can look at them all at the same time. Say they're looking at door handles, or could be interior parts. And you always have these defined positions of viewing, and you want to have a neutral environment around the sample. But here's where it gets interesting. And we see people that use these luminaires and then they hold even paint panels in their hands and they look straight on at the face, and then they rotate the sample to look at the flop and flash angles. And what ends up happening is when I'm looking at the face, I have one angle of illumination and a different angle of viewing. And in this case, it's 45 and 45. But then when I go to the flash angle, I get that roughly 15-degree angle, but my specular viewing is also different. So I have 10-degree illumination minus 15-degree viewing approximately in the setup. And then on the flop, I have roughly a 25-degree illumination and 75-degree viewing. So what's happening is you're changing both the illumination angle and the viewing angle. And that's not how the instruments work. The instruments are fixed at 45, and then they have multiple pickup points from minus 15 all the way through 110. So the best way to simulate that is to look at a multi-angle light booth. So this is just, again, summarizing that the visual evaluation when you're moving samples either in hand or putting them on some type of a bench, it's not going to equal the instrument evaluation. And so you will make visual calls that are different than your instrumental calls or instrumental information. So there is the byko-spectra effect light booth. And again, this uses a table, a tiltable table that you can put samples on and lock them in place. It has a daylight illumination of 45-degree, and then you use the lever on the outside of the light booth to change the angle of viewing. And so this just shows you the difference. Here's the 45-degree illumination is fixed, and you tilt that entire table. So the table is rotating the samples, and then your viewing is always going to equal that of the instrument so that you can coordinate what you see to the actual values that are coming from the instrument. So in addition to the color viewing, we also have 3 different angles of illumination for sparkle. So this is to simulate the 15, 45, and 75-degree sparkle values. We use bright LEDs to simulate that direct sunlight. And like most LEDs, they last forever. So we have a 10-year warranty on those. And this is just a shot looking into the booth with 2 samples. And you can see you have 3 dimmable LED controls that you can adjust if you want to have more or less illumination. Maybe more critical for paint formulation than anything else. And that just allows for the color and lightness or flop effects of the effect finishes and the effect coatings. You again have the 3 angles of illumination for sparkle, and it has excellent agreement to the instrumental data that you're retrieving. So last slide, and probably most important, hopefully we have some time for questions. The ongoing support of the program and training is really key to success. And we see a lot of movement or changes within color networks, and training and ongoing support is key to make sure that you have good color knowledge, you have good customer knowledge of what their specifications are, you have good ways to do data analysis, understand what the data is telling you. Not all the time is the answer in the LAB values. A lot of times you have to look at the spectral curves. Spectral curves are the fingerprint of the color, and it can tell you a lot about what's going on with the color. If you were looking at something and the color was just a little bit off, and you look at the spectral curve and you see a bump in a certain area of the spectrum, it could be contamination. It could be pigments being overworked. It could be a lot of things, but it's a combination of looking at curves, looking at the LAB data, and then understanding how to come up with the answer to the question that's in front of you. So with that, thank you for your attention, and I believe we have some time for some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Man, you covered a lot of ground really quick. You've talked about this stuff a couple times, huh?
Occasionally.
Occasionally. Yeah, like Greg said, questions. If there are any questions, please log them in. We got some time here. We got Greg as well as a couple other experts here that can assist. As you're going through this, Greg, and you hit upon it, but I just want to reemphasize because I hear it over and over in all of these webinars and presentations we do, is how important it is to keep the process consistent, across the board, because that will skew any numbers if that is wrong. And I think that's one of the keys, and I'm glad you hit on that, and I knew you would.
Yeah, consistency is really important, John. You make a good point, and it's not only like I mentioned for sample preparation, but even we've seen companies go across the board and say update all of their gloss meters because 50% of them were out of certification and they were getting different numbers. And gloss is something that is really sensitive to the condition of the gloss standard. In old times, over 20 years ago, you could calibrate to a dirty standard and it would essentially move your gloss numbers significantly. You can't do that anymore with the Bic-Gardner gloss meters because we have self checks now that go through that because people are so dependent on consistent gloss numbers, just for an example.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you got, plant to plant, shift to shift. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces. And unless you lock down your instrumentation, making sure it's all updated with the latest firmware, you're running the latest software across the board, and, that operator's putting the instrument in the exact same place, and direction, angle every single time.
Yeah. And I didn't go into in depth here, but when you're talking with the effect pigments and automotive colors or even coil using effect pigment, anything with effect pigment involved, each of those angles can have different weighting to them. So that's why it's so important to use digital standards whenever possible, because you can set those weighting factors up one time, lock them down, and then they don't change. So no matter who's in the network, they're always using the exact same factors, if you will, to come up to that final delta E value.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we talked about, having this presentation at the beginning of the year because, I mean, now's the time to really evaluate what you're doing, from instrumentation to the light booths, software, all the way down the chain. And I think too often that goes and kind of gets, oh, it's not a priority now, we'll do that later, and then later never comes. And then you when later comes, it may be too late, and you find yourself with a lot of scrap material, or product that just can't be used or shipped.
That's correct. And like I said, now's also the time that if you're going after new business,
Yeah.
even a lot of outside the automotive industry, a lot of people will get into color instrumentation because they get that customer that is requiring it. And
Mm.
it's a step in that direction. And those applications are perfect examples where they go from using nothing to using something,
Yeah.
and it can really make a change in the way that they look at all of their other business. And
Yeah.
again, it's really about driving profitability,
Right.
less waste, less scrap, more on color, and less rejections.
Yeah. If someone has, they don't have a formalized color program, they use little instruments here and there, what would be the first piece of advice you would give them? Where do you start? I
Best,
know that's a tough question.
best. Yeah, it's a loaded one.
I
The
know.
best suggestion is to go back to those first two slides. Look at your internal network and what those needs are, or is it driven from an external network? What your customer needs are, and if you can identify those two things, then
Yeah.
you at least know what you need to be paying attention to. If it's outside an external network, then you can ask questions. Ask your customer, how is somebody else doing it? How, if you see us as a successful supplier, what
Yeah.
should we be doing? And they'll tell you. They'll tell
Yeah.
you, what they want, what they expect. Um, it might be use instrumentation to get on color faster. A lot
Hmm.
of times, if you can deliver the right color faster, you win business. That's certainly in the industrial side of um, industrial coatings and powder applications. It's who can get that color first that
Yeah.
a lot of times wins the business, because there's not a lot of difference in pricing.
Yeah.
Certainly, service is going to be a big part of it, and you know, long-standing relationships and things like that. But use it to get on color faster.
Yep. And I think you mentioned that, ask your customers what are their expectations. That's one level too. But then how can you go beyond that and exceed their expectations? And if you're collecting all of this measurement data in Smart Chart or another software application, are there additional reports that could be of value to them to help them, streamline their process and make them, more successful?
Certainly, and one of the trends we do see, and it'll be a topic for another day, is there's a lot of applications where robotic color
Yeah.
measurement and robotic appearance or wave scan measurement is taking place. And what that's allowing people to do is gather more data and do a deeper dive on the data and more data analysis, almost like machine learning, and
Yeah.
and using data to drive the decisions. And certainly, it removes people from going out and having to take the measurement. So
Right.
manual measurements cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Um, it's more flexible than a robotics setup, but you know, if I could measure every single refrigerator, every single
Mhm.
laptop, every single tablet, every single automotive body that I produce, instead of just taking a sampling every now and then,
Right.
what would that data tell me, and how could I improve my production if I had
Yeah.
that kind of data?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then share that data and, push that either, downstream to your suppliers or upstream to your customers to help both sides of things. So yeah, great stuff. No questions so far. Do you guys have anything out there? We got some time here. Don't be bashful. We're all good people and kind, so there are no silly questions. And just note too, we are, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, we're recording this. So as soon as we conclude, you'll get an automated email with a link to this recording. Feel free to, play it again. Greg went through a lot of stuff. Feel free to, pause, take screen grabs of different things if you need to for reference, share with colleagues. Or two, if you think of a question you have, later today, next week, next month, you can hit reply to that marketing message. It'll come to, my team, and we can funnel that to Greg, if appropriate, our technical experts, or our regional sales managers. We have them, throughout the continent, and the globe,
One thing to add, John, is
Yeah.
the software capability also has the ability to record wave scan or appearance measurements, as well as film build. So if your application is film build sensitive, there is a way to add film build measurements into right along with your color measurements. So
Nice.
Again, when you're starting up a production line or starting up a new color, new product, that might be more sensitive at that point, as opposed to I've been running it for 6 months.
Yep.
But that's another use of the software tools to analyze, application techniques and variations.
No, good point. Good point. Well, we can give it a couple more minutes here, see if any questions come in. Like I said, just log it in, and we got some time here. Greg's been around a couple years, so he knows this stuff pretty well. Let's see here. No, nothing yet. All right. Well, I just want to thank you, Greg, for putting this together, and lots of just great overview information about a color program. You covered everything from the software to standards to the analysis instruments. So I just want to thank you for that. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Hope you learned a couple things today. If you need some help clarifying or need some assistance with something going on in your facility, or some challenge you're having, or just a question, just reach out to us. byk-instruments.com is the website. You can go to the contact form there. You can hit reply to any of the marketing messages you get, and we'll get it to the right people. So thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you on future BYK Instruments webinars. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Greg. Appreciate it.
Take care.
See ya.